see you guys in the dark.
So, when I was in high school, I wasn't a very hard-working student. I was a troublemaker, but I was an extremely lazy girl, working just the minimum so that my parents wouldn't get angry. I've always had some kind of easiness regarding schoolwork, and never knew it truly meant to make any effort. So I spent all of my classes drawing on my copybooks without many consequences. My junior year's math teacher, who was seen by everyone as uptight but very caring, was pretty upset about this. He wanted me to work harder. I wasn't bad at math. I was around 13 or 14. I'm French, but I assume this is like having an A, B, or a B minus. But sometimes my grades would be very low. During a teacher-parent meeting, he would tell my parents that I was wasting my capacities, that it was infuriating how much I was lazy. My mom then replied that she agreed with him, and that she wouldn't blame him for pushing me harder, and for punishing me if it was for making me work harder. And from this day on, he did exactly what she told. In every math class, he would always question me first before anyone else, was always sitting next to me when we were doing exercises. During the test, he was always telling me, "You can do it, Elisa." It made me feel incredibly uncomfortable, because at this age, no one wants to be the attention's focus. My classmates started to realize that my math teacher was a little obsessed by me, and were teasing me a lot about this. Last class before Christmas break, the math teacher threw a little surprise Christmas party. It was very nice. He gave us chocolates and mock champagne. We've had a lot of fun. During the party, he poured me another glass of mock champagne, telling me that I deserved it because I was doing better. And it was true. Because of all the attention I was forced to work, so my grades were around 15 to 16, which I think is like having an A minus or an A. I accepted it, but didn't drink it entirely. I have diabetes and already had too much chocolate. But during the next class, I was feeling very bad. I almost fainted and finished my last day of school before Christmas in the nurse's office. At that time, I wouldn't even think it was because of the alcohol-free champagne. I thought this was due to my diabetes, but I indeed had too much of the chocolate, even if it didn't look like my usual crisis. 2 weeks later, my class threw some kind of charity event. It was a class project, and we were very proud. In my country, we don't have proms, so it is our occasion to wear pretty formal clothes and to dance together. The math teacher was invited, and he was helping some of the boys to tend the bar. He served me an alcohol-free cocktail, but before I could drink it, a classmate of mine, Flora, poured some vodka into it, even though it was forbidden to bring alcohol at the moment. I was mad because of my diabetes. I couldn't drink alcohol, so I told her that she could just throw the cocktail away. At the time, I thought she did, but now when I think about it, I wonder if she didn't choose to drink it instead. The event ended pretty badly because of the alcohol Flora had brought. Some guys were very drunk. They started breaking things, etc., and Flora passed out because of all the alcohol she had. This ended the event. Flora had been admitted to the hospital because her coma was pretty severe, and she spent the next day being lectured by all the teachers in the school. Flora got expelled from the school and never went again. I was very upset with her. For every event would have been forbidden, and our project was a failure. We gave a very bad image to the association we were raised funds for. So I kind of ghosted her and never asked if she was doing better. Now I feel bad about this, but at that time I was immature. But because of that, I will never know if she was ill because of the alcohol or because of that cocktail. A few weeks later, I failed a math test. It had been a long time since I've failed a math test. The math teacher was very angry. He yelled at me in front of everyone, saying how much of a disappointment I was, that I was hopeless, that I would just end up living in a cardboard box under a bridge. Something was off. I was feeling it. He had a very weird look in his eyes. It chilled me, and I couldn't help it. I just started crying. He calmed down a bit and said that he would give me an hour of detention, during which I will copy my lesson. I was a little surprised because normally detention is for bad behavior, not for bad grades. But I was a little relieved because it was a small punishment. My parents would never know. Indeed, I lived kind of far from my high school, and there were only one bus every night between my high school and my home at 5 p.m. Because of that, even when I finished at 4, I wouldn't go home before 5. And when I've had detention between 4 and 5, my parents would never know. But then when he officially gave me the detention hour, and that the only possible hour was during 5 p.m. and 6, I was really nervous, because I would have to tell my parents to come get me at 6, and then they would know everything. As I said earlier, I wasn't a troublemaker, so at first I planned to go to the detention hour, but during the day. My friends and I talked a lot about it, and I was feeling more rebellious because of the sensation of being supported by my friends. So I decided not to tell my parents that I was in detention, and that one of my friends would pick me up at 6 and drive me home. At 5, when heading towards the detention room, I was angry, mumbling that it wasn't fair to be in detention because of one and only one bad grade. When I arrived in front of the detention room, I realized I was the only one waiting. I then realized that I would be the only student in detention, alone with the math teacher who was a little obsessive, and it was getting dark outside. It was during the late winter, early spring, so the night was early. It was a big nope for me, and when I saw him coming, I panicked. I said something like, "Sorry, I have an emergency. I have to go now. I will email the school for rescheduling my detention hour." And then I ran off. He started to yell at me that I had to obey him and go to detention, that he would call my parents. At this moment, I didn't care. I sprinted towards the bus stop and caught my bus in Extremis. Remember, he scheduled me for 5 p.m. And then I went home. I was afraid that he would have called my parents, so when I arrived, I was shaking. But my parents greeted me normally. I assumed that he actually didn't call him. He never came back the next day, nor the next weeks. Eventually, I learned that he had quit his position. A shrink came during an hour to ask if we wanted to talk about the math teacher. But as no one knew what was going on with him, we didn't have much to say, and the shrink left. And we never heard of him again, until a few months ago. I became a teacher. How ironic, given the laziness when I was a teen. And one day, chatting with my coworker, I mentioned his name, talking about my weird, bizarre math teacher, and how I skipped a detention hour. And one of my oldest coworkers went very pale. In fact, a few days after the detention hour incident, my math teacher was arrested for having downloaded a few pedo videos from the dark web and some kind of snuff movie starring children and young teens. Maybe this detention hour was just a detention hour, and I could have gone out of it without any problem. But now I will never know, and will always wonder what will have happened if I stayed there or didn't catch my bus. For context, this happened to me and my friend when we were about 12 or 13. It was summer, suburban Illinois. We're both female. I've always had an affinity for water, so my friend and I frequently went to the public pool whenever we had free time. It was in the middle of July, just after the 4th, busy season. The pool was packed as usual, nearly at capacity. Normally we'd be completely ignored as we'd flop around in the deepest end to escape the crowd. But this time we were approached. 2 Hispanic men, one tall and extremely pale, scruffy with bad skin and residual acne scarring. The other was short, pudgy, dark skin, and strikingly dark eyes. They were an odd pair to see together, but shared similar features and were obviously related in some way. They looked to be in their mid to late 20s. Not too long after we'd made our way out of the crowds to our deep-end corner, these 2 struck up a conversation with us. The tall one was enamored with my friend, the fat one with me. They asked us for our names very casually and began extremely sheltered, naive children. We were way too open and honest with them. We conversed for some time about kid stuff, and they asked if we wanted to play chicken. My friend and I didn't even have a chance to respond before they dove underwater and scoped us up over their shoulders. At that point, the lifeguards scolded them, and we were set back down. They quickly left to get lunch. For or 2 passes, we agree that they were creepy and migrate to the lazy river. As we're waiting for a tube, they slip into line behind us and attempt to strike up another conversation. We're polite, but a bit wary at this point, We make it to the front of the line. The only tube they had available was a quad. In our stupidity, we decided to get in and see about ditching out and finding our own tube while we were cruising. What's a little more conversation between friends, right? As soon as we pass under the first bridge and out of sight, they start telling us they're recently out of jail and brought knives. By the time we reach the second bridge, the tall one plants his feet down and keeps the tube from moving. It isn't noticeable in the crowd. There isn't even room to leave the tube. The larger one grabs my shoulders and glares at me, asking for a kiss. My friend is grabbed in a similar fashion. We duck, and they seem irritated. We're petrified. They ask if we like them, and we'll keep it a secret. We say yes. They ask if we want to meet them in their car for fun. We say yes. They let the tube keep floating and tell us to keep out of at the next stop, to head to the changing room and meet them out front. We headed straight there and quickly ran through, darting up to the staff room and pounding on the door. They let us in. We told them that we weren't feeling well and needed to call home. They obliged, and my mother picked us up 30 minutes later. We hid out in the dressing room until then and orbited the older ladies. The men waited for about 15 minutes, visible from the ventilation windows, and then booked it. In retrospect, I wish we had called the cops, but we both came from hyper-religious, patriarchal families. We were scared of the implications. I didn't really realize the gravity of the situation until I was laying in bed that night and thought about what our future would have looked like if we followed them. I hope you pedophiles got busted. Hi, for the record, I'm a female. I'm turning 19 this year, and the story happened when I was 15. Oh, and also, I'm from France, which can explain my English mistakes if there are any. When I was 15 and just got into junior year, I created my first Twitter account that I deleted because of this story. Some information. I didn't tell anyone my username, neither my family nor my friends, because I didn't have any. My profile picture was an avatar, so no pictures of me on the account. And as location, I said Paris because I lived in the suburbs. I didn't have many followers, 20 or maybe 30, and didn't follow that many people, so my TL was not really interesting. One evening in October, someone sent me quite a strange direct message. It was a 200-follower account, and the message was, "Hi, my name is Rob. I just turned 17 and wanted to know if you lived in blank, because I will soon move in and go to the town high school, and I'm looking for some friends." Blank was obviously the town that I lived in. I immediately thought something was wrong, because there was nowhere on my profile I said where I actually lived. But after some time thinking, I remembered of a tweet I made weeks ago about buses, and I mentioned the city. So I told myself he just looked up blank and found my tweet. His age wasn't shocking because I'm 2 years ahead of my classmates. I was bored, and as he was polite, I answered him. I told him I indeed lived in there, and to go to high school there. The discussion was natural, and we talked a lot that night, mainly about high school, about the food at the cafeteria, about the teachers, that kind of thing. But as it was getting very late, he tried to interpose some personal questions, like, do you live far away from the school? In a house or an apartment? Do you live with both your parents? There's 5 of you? You're not often home alone, right? I never answered because it was way too shady for me, and unfortunately, he didn't insist. Unfortunately, because if he did, I would have probably blocked him. The next day, the same thing. We talked a lot, and he was still asking personal questions. To know me better, I guess. So I asked some too, and he always answered with what seemed like honesty. I still didn't answer the questions about my house, though, because he didn't need to know anything. It lasted 2 or 3 weeks, but it was enough for me to develop feelings for him. He was handsome, super kind, and it was everything that I needed, because I was bullied for years, and even today, I still develop strong feelings, but most importantly, blind trust in people who are friendly to me. In France, in October, we have a 2-week-long vacation, and the day before back-to-school day, he finally told me he was coming to my high school, because he finally moved in with his mom, and he asked me a place to meet during the morning break. I was so happy and relieved to be able to meet him. and told him to join me in the hall. But when he understood that there would be people around, he said he would prefer an isolated place, because he was afraid he would not recognize me and didn't want to spend a break looking for me. It was a good excuse for me, so I told him to meet me in the third-floor bathroom, because we weren't allowed to stay there during the breaks, and no one disturb us. In my head, even though it was a little bit creepy, I still was in school, so nothing would happen to me. Next day, back to school day. I made myself pretty. I wore my best clothing. I counted down the minutes, and finally, when break time arrived, I ran to the bathroom and waited. And when he arrived, it was him. He was not a catfish. He looked quite like his profile picture, but I still noticed that he seemed a little bit older than he told me. I thought 20 years old instead of 17. We talked a lot. We got along well. I was so pleased, and ate at the end of the break. He asked me to go to the fast food with him for lunch. I told him no, because I didn't have any money, and I always refuse for people to pay for me. It's a principle. He seemed disappointed, but offered to walk me home after classes. I explained I have to take the bus, but he would walk me to the bus stop. He looked disappointed again, but finally accepted. That's exactly what happened, and it was so great that it quickly became some kind of routine. We met in the third-floor bathroom during the morning break, and he walked me to the bus stop after classes. Surprising fact, I never saw him in the hallways, nor at the cafeteria. But I thought at that time the building was huge, and that there was over 1,500 students in there. So if our schedules didn't coincide, there was no way that we would meet each other. This little game lasted until December, so almost a month and a half. The 14th of December, a Thursday, I complained about how lonely I was going to be that evening because my dad was abroad for work. My brother was always at his friend's house. My little sister was on a school trip, and my mom had to work late that very night. It was a very reckless thing of me, but after weeks I thought that I could trust him. That evening, he walked me to the bus stop. We both waited. I got on the bus, waved at him, and put on my earphones. I had 2 stops before my house. It was about 17:45 in December, so it was really dark outside, and I got out of the bus. I had a really bad feeling about it. There was this very uncomfortable sensation in my stomach. I felt like I was being observed. I pressed pause on my music, but kept my earphones on so that people thought that I couldn't hear anything, and that's probably what saved my life. I lived in a suburban neighborhood, very silent, especially at night, with no visibility on the big road the bus passed on. When I heard footsteps behind me, I understood that I was right. There was someone following me, and he was not well-intentioned. At least I could hear that he was not accelerating. He was not trying to catch up with me, but I couldn't guess how long it would last. As quietly as possible, I tried to reach for my keys in my pocket, and when I finally pulled them out, I ran as fast as I could. The best sprint of my life. I don't know how it worked, but I managed to open and to close the door before he could reach me. I then deactivated my alarm, which, by the way, confirmed that I was home alone, and took a look through the glass panel on the door. It is not a peephole, it is just a whole window, so if someone wanted to see what's happening inside, they could. It was Rob, just a few meters away, looking at me with a really creepy face. He followed me to my home, probably with a car, and he was clearly not here for chit-chat. I still don't know why I didn't call the police. I was totally paralyzed. We both stared at each other for a minute. When I took back control over my body, I ran in the kitchen to get a knife and got back to the door. He was there too, banging against the door. I feared for a second that the glass would break, but it didn't happen. That moment when I was pushing against the door, praying for it not to break while he was kicking harder and harder, was the longest that I've ever experienced. After maybe 5 minutes, he stopped and got around the house, knocking against every shutter, and got back to the door. He looked very angry, but then my neighbor's car reached my house, and Rob ran away, probably thinking that it was my mom coming home. On Twitter, Rob sent me 1,000 messages before I could block him. He then deleted his account, and I thought I was done with the story. But quickly after, some accounts which have just been created followed me. Their @Twitters were all a series of numbers, and the first letter of his name. And as soon as I blocked one, another one would follow. I chose to delete my account because I couldn't make it stop, and it was too hard to endure because they were sending me dozens of insulting DMs. Later, I talked to the people who were supposed to be Rob's classmates because I haven't met him again in days, but not a single one ever heard about a Rob. This guy was never a student in my high school. That is why I've never met him apart from our daily meetings, and that is probably why he seemed so old. I never heard about him anymore, and I'm still asking myself, what did he want, and what could have happened that night had he gotten inside of my house? If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos, and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.